His grandmother poisoned him against her before she could say a word. And when he finally told her the truth, she did something nobody expected. The last person out of the boardroom was Director Lim. He did not leave quickly. That is the detail Essie noticed. Standing at the center of that long table with Nelu warm against her chest and Kang Taeju still at the far end of the room. Director Lim gathered his things with the deliberate slowness of a man who has spent 22 years in this family's service and understands that information gathered in the final seconds of a room is worth more than anything said at the table itself. He straightened his papers. He capped his pen. He looked once at Taeju, once at Isi, once at the document wallet on the table. Then he walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, and the boardroom became 3 people. Isi had prepared for this moment. Not this specific room, not this specific morning, but the essential shape of it. The moment when. The architecture of her plan had fully executed and there was nothing left to do but stand in whatever came next. She had run through every version of it in the apartment in Mapogu, in the quiet after Nelu went down, in the early mornings before the city woke up. She had prepared for his lawyers. She had prepared for his silence. She had prepared for the controlled, boardroom version of him that would thank her for coming and inform her that everything would be handled through the appropriate channels. What she had not prepared for was the quality of the silence that filled the room when the door closed. Not aggressive, not performing, just silence. Kang Taeju, standing at the head of his own table in the building his family had constructed around him like a second skeleton, and he was doing nothing with it. He was not reaching for control. He was not calculating his next move. He was not doing anything at all except looking at his daughter. Just looking. The way a person looks at something they did not know existed until 4 minutes ago, and are still in the process of making real in their mind. Nelu had woken in the final minute before the board filed out. She had opened her eyes, assessed the room full of strangers with her customary lack of drama, decided the situation was adequate, and moved on to examining the ceiling. The very high, very expensive ceiling of the KH Group boardroom, which had never before been examined by anyone with this quality of pure, uncomplicated attention. Isi watched Taeju watching his daughter, and she kept her face exactly where she had placed it when she walked through those doors. Composed, clear, present on her own terms. She had practiced this face for 11 months, and she knew its precise cost, and she was paying it without complaint because that is what you did with costs you had already agreed to. He looked up from Nelu. He looked at Isi. And for the first time in 14 months, there was no one left in the room to perform for. For 14 months she had imagined this moment, the first words. She had imagined anger, excuses, a silence so complete it would tell her everything. She had imagined every version. She had not imagined this one. She had not imagined a man who opened his mouth and said the one thing that would require her to rearrange everything she believed she knew about the worst night of her life. He said, "I need to tell you what happened that afternoon." Not that night. That afternoon. Essie looked at him. She did not speak. She had learned long ago that silence was the most powerful response available in a room, because silence cannot be argued with, cannot be deflected, can only be answered with truth or a performance of truth. And she would be able to tell the difference. She had always been able to tell the difference. He walked around the length of the table, not toward her. He stopped at the midpoint, a deliberate distance, the distance of a man who understands with complete precision that he does not have the right to close the gap. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her. He said, "My grandmother called me at 3 in the afternoon, the day you came home to tell me." The day. He said it carefully. Not that night. That specific day. Essie did not move. He said she had received information from her sources. He did not know then and does not know now who those sources were, which is the question that had cost him the most sleep over 11 months. She had received information that Essie was planning to use a pregnancy as leverage in the dissolution proceedings, that the approach had been discussed with a lawyer, that the timing was not coincidence. He said she delivered this the way she delivered everything, with precision, without visible emotion in the specific tone she reserved for moments when she had already decided what the truth was and was simply informing you of it. There was no room in how she spoke for the possibility that she could be wrong. The Kang family had not built what they built over 3 generations by leaving room for that possibility. He said, "By the time she finished the call, I had no framework left to receive what you came home to tell me." She had already built the walls of the room. "I walked into the evening already inside those walls, and when you sat down across from me, I could not see past them. I could not see you past them." He stopped. He looked at Nelu for a moment. That same quality of looking, like a man memorizing something. And then back at Isi. He said, "I should have put the phone down and waited for you to walk through the door with nothing in my hands. I have gone over every version of that night for 11 months. Every single version. And in all of them there is one moment. The moment before my mouth opened. Where I could have chosen differently." He looked at her directly. He said, "I did not choose differently. And I have been living inside that failure every day since you left." The boardroom held the words. Easy stood with her hand flat on Nelu's back, feeling the small, steady heartbeat against her palm. Fast and certain, like something that had decided before it was born that it was not going to stop. And she did something she had not permitted herself since she put the legal letter in its clear plastic sleeve, 32 days after she walked out of the apartment in Hanamdong. She thought about that night from the beginning. She thought about the hallway, her hand on the doorframe, the 45 seconds she counted. She thought about walking into the living room and seeing the bourbon on the coffee table and clocking it and deciding not to let it change her direction. She thought about his face when she sat down across from him, the flat, somewhere else quality of it, the quality she had been reading for 2 years as absence, as retreat, as a man who had been walking away from her, one slow step at a time. She thought about all of it now with new information laid underneath it. He had not been absent that evening. He had been occupied. His grandmother had spent a phone call that afternoon building a room inside his mind. Walls up, ceiling low, every exit pre-blocked. And by the time Essie walked through the front door, he was already inside it. What she had read as cruelty that night was something more complicated and, in certain ways, worse. Not a man who had chosen to dismiss her. A man who had been so thoroughly managed by his own family that he did not recognize the management for what it was. A man who had been handed a story and walked into the evening carrying it. And when the real story arrived in the form of his wife sitting across from him with 4 days of practice steadiness and a test in her bag, he had not been able to put down the one he was already holding. This did not make what he said to her forgivable. Essie needed this to be clear in her own mind, so let it also be clear here. The fact that Halmoni had prepared the ground did not mean Taeju had no choice about what grew from it. He had made a choice. He had looked across that table at a woman he had married with his own hands and chosen the version his grandmother gave him over the version sitting in front of him. His grandmother had handed him a weapon, and he had picked it up, and he had used it. The fact that the weapon was given did not absolve the using. She had known this for 11 months. She had filed it correctly from the start under. His failure, not hers. She had not spent a single day wondering if she had done something to deserve it. But there is a difference between knowing a thing and understanding the full shape of it. And standing in this boardroom with the full shape finally visible, the afternoon call, the prepared walls, the grandmother who had moved her grandson like a piece across a board without ever telling him he was being moved. Essie felt something shift in her chest that was not forgiveness and was not warmth, and was not anything she was prepared to name in this room, or possibly any room for a long time. It was the specific and dangerous feeling of a wound being given an explanation. She had managed without explanations for 11 months. Silence you could file and move past. An explanation was different. An explanation made you want to understand. And wanting to understand was the first step towards something she had not given herself permission to take. She kept her face exactly where she had put it. She had come into this room with one agenda: the papers, the letter, the clean legal conclusion of an unfinished thing. She had not come in here to understand him. She had not come in here to feel the specific dangerous shift of a wound receiving an explanation. She had not come in here for any of this. And yet, here she was, standing in the middle of something she had not planned for, holding a baby on her chest and looking at a man who had just handed her something she could not hand back. She spoke for the first time since the board had left the room. She said, "Your grandmother knew before I did." Not a question. He said, "I don't know how. I have spent 11 months trying to find the version of the timeline where she found out without someone telling her, and I cannot find it." Which means someone in our life, someone close enough to know, or close enough to someone who knew, was feeding information to the family. I have gone over every person and every connection I can think of. I have not been able to land on a name, and the not landing keeps me up. Essie said, "It doesn't matter who told her." He looked at her. She said, "What matters is what she did with the information. She didn't tell you. She weaponized it." Those are two different choices, and she made the second one deliberately. The who doesn't change the what. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "You are more generous than she deserves." Essie looked at him with the expression she kept for statements that were factually incorrect and did not require argument. She said, "I am not being generous. I am being accurate. Understanding the mechanics of how something happened is not the same as excusing it. I can understand exactly what your grandmother did and still hold her fully responsible for it. Those two things coexist. I have been doing it for 11 months. He looked at her. She had forgotten, in 11 months of carefully not thinking about the things she had loved about him, that this was one of them. The way he looked at her when she said something that reached him. Not admiration, nothing that performed. Just the quality of a person who has actually been reached by something, present, unguarded. The same quality she had heard in the laugh in the corridor 4 years ago in a Gangnam club and had spent 4 days deciding whether to call. She filed it immediately. Under. Irrelevant to the current situation. She looked down at Nelu. She said, "There is something you need to do before I leave this building." He waited. She said, "You need to hold her. Not with the board watching. Not with a point to be made. Just hold her. Know what she weighs. Know what you almost never knew existed." She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him. She unstrapped the carrier with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had performed this action 10,000 times, and she lifted Nelu out, and she held her toward him with the steadiness of someone making a decision they have already thought through, rather than one they are making in the moment. He took her. He positioned his hands exactly as she had described without being told, one behind the head, one under the back. And she registered this small evidence of a man who had been paying attention to information she had not yet given him, and she filed it, and she did not reach any conclusion from it yet. He had been paying attention. That was the thing she noticed and immediately refused to make anything of. Because a man who has paid attention once is not the same as a man who will pay attention always. One morning in a boardroom proved nothing. She knew this. She believed this. She was going to keep believing it for as long as it took to be sure. But she watched him hold his daughter for the first time, and what she saw in his face was not something she had been prepared for. He held Nelu in the 39th floor boardroom of the KH Group tower with Seoul burning white behind the glass, and not a single witness left in the room. Nelu looked up at him. She did what she always did with new things. She assessed. She took her time. She looked at him with the full, unfiltered, unjudging attention of someone who has not yet learned that looking directly at things is something adults manage very carefully. She looked at his face the way she looked at the ceiling fan and the mobile above her crib, and the woman from the second floor who brought fruit. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, like it was simply there and she was simply here, and the question of whether it was acceptable was entirely her own to answer. She decided. She made a sound. Not a word. Not a cry. Something declarative. The sound of a small person who has completed her assessment and reached a conclusion she is willing to share. Taeju made a sound back. It was not a word either. It came from somewhere below language, from a place that had not been reached in a long time by anything that did not first require management and control and the careful construction of how things appeared. His daughter had reached it with a single sound, and he had nothing in him trained to respond to that, except the part that was deeper than training. He looked at her face. Essie stood 2 steps away. She kept her face where she had put it. She paid the cost. She did not move toward what she was watching, and she did not move away from it. He held Nelu for a long time. He spoke to her in a low voice. Korean first, then something else. Something Issy recognized from the 2 years of their marriage as the language his mother had given him. Twi. The Ghanaian half of him that the Kang family had spent 30 years politely declining to fully incorporate into the architecture of who he was supposed to be. He spoke it to his daughter in the room his family had built, and it sounded, Essie thought, like the most honest thing he had said in that building in as long as she had known him. She thought this, and filed it, and did not make anything of it yet. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. He did not wipe them. He did not manage how he appeared. He just looked at Issy with the wet eyes and the full, unguarded face of a man who was not performing anything at all, and he said, "Thank you for bringing her." Issy said, "I didn't bring her for you. I brought her because she deserved to be seen by her father before a lawyer made it official. Those are different reasons." He said, "I know. Thank you anyway." She took Nelu back. She strapped her into the carrier. She picked up the document wallet from the table. She looked at him once, a full look, taking actual measure. And then she said, "My lawyer will be in touch about the visiting schedule." She walked to the door. She had done what she came to do. The papers were on the table. The letter had been read. He had held his daughter. She had kept her face and paid its cost and given him the one honest exchange she had allowed herself to give, and she had not given anything else, and she was finished, and she was leaving. She pushed through the boardroom door. She walked into the corridor. The elevator was at the far end, its doors closed, the numbers above it counting floors. She did not look back. She pressed the button. The numbers began descending. She stood in front of the closed doors with Nelu against her chest and the document wallet at her side and Seoul visible through the corridor. Window doing what Seoul always did, continuing entirely regardless of what any individual person was doing inside any building within it. She heard the boardroom door open behind her. She did not turn around. His footsteps in the corridor. She counted them without meaning to. 6 steps. Then they stopped. She did not turn around. The elevator arrived. A soft chime. The doors slid open. She stepped in. She turned to face front. She always turned to face front. And she reached for the lobby button and the doors began to close. And then he said it. He said it quietly. Not with the urgency of a man trying to stop something. Not with the performance of a man making a speech. He said it the way you say a thing that is simply true and has been true for longer than you have known how to say it out loud. He said, I never stopped. 3 words. The doors closed. The elevator began its descent through 39 floors of a building that had been designed to keep her out and had failed. Essie stood in the small enclosed space with Nelu and the document wallet, and the particular silence of a descending elevator, and those 3 words hanging in the air with no intention of dispersing. She did not press any button. She did not do anything except breathe, in for 4 counts, out for 6, the rhythm that had been given to her on a Tuesday in her 7th month by an instructor in a fluorescent-lit room who had sat beside her without making it a moment. She breathed. She looked straight ahead. The lobby arrived. The doors opened. Marble floor. Flower arrangement. The ordinary machinery of the building going about its ordinary Tuesday business, entirely indifferent to what had just happened on the 39th floor. Essie walked out. She crossed the lobby. She pushed through the glass doors. She walked into Seoul. Bright, enormous, 10 million people, none of whom knew or cared about any of this. And she found Abina's car 1 street away, and she opened the door, and she got in, and she buckled Nelu's seat, and she sat in the passenger seat, and she looked through the windshield at the ordinary street. Abena looked at her. She said, How did it go? Essie was quiet for a long moment. She said, He told me what his grandmother said to him the afternoon before I came home. Abena said, And? She said, It changes the shape of what I thought I knew about that night. Abena said, Is that good or bad? Essie looked at the street, at the Pojangmatcha cart on the corner opening for the lunch rush, at a woman walking past with a child on her back in a carrier the color of deep blue, at Seoul going about its business, requiring nothing, guaranteeing nothing, offering everything to anyone willing to build for it. She thought about 3 words in an elevator. She thought about the expression on his face when he held his daughter. She thought about the crack in her chest that was not a break, and was not a bridge, and was something she did not have a word for yet. Something that existed in the space between those 2 things, requiring more information before it could decide what it was. She said, Ask me when I know. Abena held her eye for a moment. Then she put the car in drive. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Seoul moved past the windows. Nelu slept. The document wallet sat on the seat between them. Every page signed, every tab labeled, the clean legal architecture of an ending. Except she was only now beginning to understand that what she had walked into that boardroom to end was not as finished as she had spent 11 months preparing to make it. Not because of the holding, not because of the twi spoken to a 3-month-old who could not yet understand any language, not because of the wet eyes he did not wipe, because of 3 words said to a closing elevator door by a man who had nothing left to perform for, and had said the thing that was simply true. I never stopped. She had not asked what they meant. She had not given him the chance to expand or explain or surround them with context that would make them easier to file away. She had let the doors close. She had let the words come with her. And she was going to have to decide. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not until she had looked at enough evidence to trust her own judgment about it. What to do with them. She knew 2 things. The first, she did not need him. She had proven this in every room that mattered, in every morning that did not offer applause, in 11 months of building a life from the ground up that was real and solid and entirely her own. She did not need him, and she never would again. And that was not a wound. That was the most important thing she had ever built. The second, needing and choosing were not the same thing. She had always known this. She had said yes on a kitchen floor with full information and clear eyes, and it had been a choice, not a need. And the choice had been real even if what followed it had broken. Choices could be made. Again. Not the same choice. Something new. built from what was left after the breaking, which was sometimes stronger than what was there before. She was not making any choice today. Today, she was going home. She was going to put Nelu down and make tea and sit in the apartment she had built from nothing and let the morning be what it was. But the words were coming with her. She already knew that. She had always known when something was coming with her. She had known it at 17, with a scholarship letter on a kitchen table. She had known it at 24, stepping off a plane in Seoul with one suitcase and a language she had learned in secret. She had known it the first time she heard a real laugh in a corridor in Gangnam and spent 4 days deciding whether to call. She knew it now. The question was not whether it was coming. The question was what she was going to do when she was ready. And Esinam, who had built everything she had from decisions made at the correct distance between impulse and readiness, who had learned that 4 days was sometimes enough and 11 months was sometimes necessary, and that the only measure that mattered was your own honest judgment of when the ground was solid. Esinam was not ready yet, but she was, for the first time in 14 months, thinking about what ready might feel like when it arrived. On next episode 3, he shows up at her door. Not with lawyers, not with a message through a representative. Just himself, at 7 p.m., alone, holding nothing. And what he says when she opens it is not an apology. It is something harder than that. Something that costs him more. And what she does with it. The specific, unexpected, completely Esinam thing she does with it is the moment the audience stops being certain about where this is going. Subscribe now. You cannot afford to miss episode 3. And before you go, when those elevator doors closed, should she have turned around? Drop a comment. I need to know where you stand.